Well, welcome to this, the fourth of our series on doctors in the heart of Africa, our story for 50 years. And we just want to say a little bit about government and about presidents of Congo that we have met, that we have known, that we have studied. So let me share screen and allow you to see what. So, as I say, we're on the fourth of our presentations, presidents and government of the DR Congo. I would encourage you to bear in mind the whole time is that Congo is the richest country in the world. This is a rather poor photograph of an open pit gold mine. And that really is an enormous hole in the ground. And large quantities of gold are being dug out. When other areas of gold are found in the northeast part of Congo, then this hole could be left alone, and a similar one started not so very far away. If that means moving part of the population, then they will be moved so that a mine can be set up under their homes. We have told you a little bit about independence, about the Simba rebellion that followed independence, about the chaos that there was at that time. At independence, there were no Congolese officers in the Congolese army. They were all white. Mobutu was a sergeant in the army. He'd been put in the army because his conduct had not been very good, and it was thought that that would be helpful to give him some discipline. And he became head of the army. The former Belgian head of the army became his subordinate and advised him. But Mobutu was very wise in many ways. He watched the chaos for some 5 years, and when things started to settle down, they become a little bit more stability. Then he led a coup d'etat, became the acting head of country back in 1965. He actually declared himself president a little bit after that, but he said he was stepping in order to consolidate, maintain, advance the peace that had arrived in the country. He established a single political party, the Popular Movement for the Revolution, the MPR, Mouvement Populaire de la Révolution, as the sole legal political party in 1967. 1971, he changed the name of the Congo to Zaire, an old Portuguese word for the river that comes out into the sea immediately above Angola. Changed his own name from Joseph Mobutu to Mobutu Sese Seko as an aim towards authenticity, authentic African names rather than European names. And he claimed that his political ideology was neither left nor right nor even center, though many changes did come after he made a visit to Mao Zedong in China. Particularly one aspect that came in was the suit. He did away with suits and ties, but the Mao jacket, the Mao shirt and matching trousers, he imported into the country. He called it an abacos, and it became African, and that's what he would wear with the shirt being open, but with a cravat, but no tie. And he developed a regime that was very dictatorial, autocratic. He was the head of the country. This was his symbol, a torch carried by a black hand, torch leading the way, lighting the way forward for a country like Congo. Congo, this enormous, almost square country right in the center of Africa, and about a quarter the size of Canada, a huge, huge country. We worked up in the northeast corner, which some German geologist, geographer, declared was the absolute center of Africa, hence this title, The Heart of Africa. And this was the slogan of Mobutu's political party, servir et non se servir. That means to serve, but do not serve yourself. This was his motto, and we can agree with it wholeheartedly, but unfortunately Mobutu didn't follow it. He did serve the people, I suppose, but he also served himself and impoverished the nation's coffers. He attempted to purge the country of all colonial influence through his program of authenticity. And many people were very happy with authenticity, to express African ideals and African music and African fabrics. And there was no clash with the people. They were very happy to follow this authentic model. It had been started by Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, but carried on a little bit later on by Mobutu. I've already mentioned the Mao suit, the abacos, which Mobutu claimed to be authentic, but really was just a copy of what they were doing in China. So you wore a cravat, but no tie. Interesting, when we arrived back in 1973, all the talk was of his objective 80. That meant his objective in 1980 was that Congo would be able to survive without any expatriate help. He wanted Congolese to be put in all positions of authority. He wanted Congolese to take over businesses that were run by expatriates. He wanted the school system to be completely run by Africans. But this was a very good spur for us to train our successors as quickly as possible, to hand on to others all of the experience and knowledge that we could as quickly as possible. And you will know that this was our objective from 1973. It was teaching and training. The Belgians had neglected training and education, but now, particularly through the churches, Protestant and Catholic, there was a big emphasis on training and training successors. And these have been as successors. I've shown you this picture before, a picture that brings back a lot of very happy memories to us, but this is the first class that we accepted in 1973 when we took over the running of this nursing school from Helen Roseveare. And for instance, this gentleman here in the middle, that's Underhoso. He was able to go to Belgium to do a master's. He went, first of all, became a graduate nurse in Congo, and then he went to Belgium and obtained a master's in nursing, and he is now the academic dean of the present nursing college that we'll be telling you about in Bunia. I met President Mobutu in 1978. Big, tall man, sturdy man, very firm handshake, deep voice. Gives you the impression that he's fully in control. No timidity there at all, making decisive decisions. You can just see me over the top of his right shoulder. Next to me is Dr. Asabi, who was one of the African doctors with us at that time, and the other white that is looking straight ahead is Dr. Bob Watt, who was a pharmacist at the CME hospital. Mobutu's wife, his first wife, just ahead of him. With her, he had 11 children. But when she died, fairly young, age 38, he took two identical twins as his wives. And we were never sure when he turned up with one wife which of the twins it was. And here's Mobutu. He arrived by helicopter. We're sorry that he didn't come by road to see the very, very poor state of the roads in our part of the world. But he came by helicopter and walking down to the political office at this in this rural city. He passed our students, and there they are with beautiful white aprons. The girls, the fellows in blue tops and navy blue trousers, and he noticed them. His wife beside him, and he gave us $10,000. He, as a man, walks behind with a briefcase full of American dollars, and he handed to somebody there in the school $10,000 to help us, just because we'd come out to welcome him. Again, other pictures of him walking down to the zone office to have a meal before going back to his helicopter and moving on to somewhere else. Being guarded by soldiers and policemen. When I stood in line to shake his hand, somebody, before he arrived, came behind me and frisked me gently to see if I was carrying a gun or a weapon, which might have been dangerous for Mobutu. His personal guard was trained in Israel. There he is again with a welcome speech being given to him. So the school was very proud of the fact that Mobutu had restored peace in the country, that there was freedom to conduct your normal life without fear of rebels, without fear of disruption of general living conditions, and a picture of Mobutu and a statue of Mobutu that somebody had made, one of our students, just in front of this little presentation. In 1976, there was a lot of criticism by Mobutu of the churches and particularly, of course, the schools that the churches were running. As I mentioned before, the Belgians had neglected education, and it was the Catholic churches and the Protestant churches that set up primary and secondary education and even university education. But Mobutu criticized the churches for what they were doing, for their neglect, particularly of the official syllabus that was put out by Kinshasa. And he said that the only courses that were common to all of the schools were the religious courses. So he prohibited the teaching of religion, and he took over all schools, and in order for the state to run them. And at this point, many religious workers, Catholic, Protestant, decided to leave the school system, leave the government to run the school system. And for the nursing college there at Nyankundi, we stopped religious classes, as he said. We had to stop the teaching of religion, but we continued with our practice of religion at morning prayers. So school started at 7 o'clock in the morning by half an hour of worship and Bible study. And we continued with that. That was the practice of religion. We felt it wasn't the organized teaching of religion. But 1977, the state could not organize the school system, and it was handed back to the churches. And the schools are still managed by the churches up to today. That's not true of the universities, although some of them are run by churches, but the main three universities that have been set up, Kinshasa was set up by the Catholics, Kisangani was set up by the Protestants, and Lumumbashi was set up by the Kimbanguists, a form of Christianity which is confined to Congo and very strict on rules about smoking and alcohol. But the state handed back the schools, primary schools, secondary schools, to the churches, and they're still managed by the churches today. The state pays salaries of teachers, but the administration, local recruiting, organization of the schools are still managed by church offices, either a Protestant office or a Catholic office. So the same 1977, leading up to Objective 80 in 1980, expatriate businesses were nationalized. As far as I know, nobody received any financial compensation. I can tell you just one story of a Bunya baker. The bakery was run by a Belgian, so the business was taken out of his hands and he handed it to his most competent African baker that was working for him. But this Congolese decided that they would not make quite as much bread as they had in the past. In fact, they'd make 1/3 the amount of bread, and they put the price up 3 times. So he was earning as much money for a little less work. And many of the businesses failed at this point because the Congolese just were not capable of running them. And since then, businesses have opened up by various expatriate workers, some from India, some from Lebanon, other places, and businesses very often are in the hands of expatriates today. During his rule, he amassed a huge personal fortune, thought to be about the 4th richest man in the world at one time. And this led to some people calling his rule a kleptocracy, a whole series of officials whose main duty was to steal money one way or another. And he presided over a period of widespread human rights violations. So there was uncontrolled inflation, the arrival of a large national debt, and massive currency devaluations. Not just devaluations, but something called demonetarization. And at one stage, Mobutu decided that the banknotes that were produced, 5 Zaires, the name of the currency was Zaire, just as the name of the country was Zaire, the name of the river was Zaire. He called the banknotes that were printed during his time as president He called them Zairs. And the 5 and the 10 Zaire notes were deemed to be of no use whatsoever. What he did was to change the color of the notes. The old green 5 Zaire notes became blue, and the old blue 10 Zaire notes became green. And Mobutu said that the old 5s and the old 10s were now of no value whatsoever. And he a lot of people lost a lot of money. If they were keeping their money hidden under a mattress, then they lost a lot of money. If they had money in the bank, then their money was protected, but not a lot of people had bank accounts, most living with currency notes like this. The demonetization actually happened immediately after Christmas, and a number of churches that had a big Christmas collection found that their money was of no value whatsoever. You could queue up at the bank and try and get your money changed, the old greens for the new blues, but very, very few people were served. And then the bank said, well, we've run out of money. Kinshasa hasn't sent us any more of the new currency. And so people were kicking these old notes around, a bundle of notes, just like a football. They were of no value whatsoever. Of course, the amount of money that was left in the coffers of the state became much more valuable after they'd got rid of all of these smaller notes. So Mobutu, if I could summarize Mobutu's time in power, 35 years as president of Congo, I would say that he was loved by the people. Why was he loved? Because he brought in stability, because the rebel activity that had been going on was now stopped. The country was united under one strong president, not necessarily a strong government, but a strong president who dictated what would happen. But he was feared by politicians. They never knew if they upset him, what might happen to them, and a lot of people disappeared. And we talked about a lack of human rights. And yes, stories abound of people that were murdered, then taken by helicopter out over the Congo River and dumped in the river, and not heard of or seen again. It's thought that there were about 80 very influential persons in the country who were in the government, who worked under Mobutu. These are the big bosses, and Mobutu rotated them the whole time. The person who is prime minister today might suddenly appear in prison because he'd done something or said something that Mobutu didn't like. But then you'd find that in a few months later, he had been appointed as ambassador of Congo, of Zaire, to the United States. And probably Mobutu had asked the Americans to keep an eye on this fellow, make sure that he didn't recruit an army to come and displace he himself. Feared by the politicians in part because of their wives. How do you dominate the ministers in your government? Well, you humiliate them. And you humiliate them by having relationships with their wives. And I'm going to show you an extract of a film in a moment where this is all brought out into the open. And the ministers whose wives had been abused didn't complain. If they had have complained, they might have lost their lives. it was complete domination by the president of all of these 80 people who might have been some kind of opposition to him. In fact, Mobutu paid people to start political parties in order to divide the opposition, any kind of opposition that there might have been. You could get money if you would start a political party. And at one stage, there were some 80 different political parties. The only one that anybody knew much about was the MPR. That was Mobutu's party. That was where all the money was and where all the power was. But there were lots of other parties, different tribal groups, different interests that might have been in opposition to Mobutu, but never had enough people to be at all influent. So the bottom line that we now see, despite the fact that there was stability and peace, Mobutu completely destroyed the Congo. And you can find some very interesting videos which develop this theme on YouTube, and I would encourage you to do that. Just recently, the IMF have produced this graph showing the gross domestic product per capita of population in Congo, starting from 1960 at independence, and then 65 when Mobutu came to power, but how there was just a slow slip down to something like 20% of the GDP at independence back in year 2000. So this is, I think, an accurate indication of what happened in the country during Mobutu's presidency. 1960, Congo had something like 15,000 kilometers of good roads, and they were maintained by manual labor. Capita had 5 kilometers of road that he was responsible for, and if there were potholes in his section of 5 kilometers, a Belgian officer could get him whipped or could get one of his hands cut off. He would be severely disciplined for the fact that he had not organized the local people to keep the roads in good shape. Of course, this system in 1960 collapsed. This was independence, and Congo was going to keep its roads good by the use of road graders and modern mechanical equipment. But that was a very, very difficult changeover from manual labor to this sophisticated machinery. 1960, 15,000 kilometers of good roads. They say in 1990, Congo had 5,000 kilometers of passable roads, but the roads not at all good. And they were supposed to be maintained by road graders, and Canada actually gave Congo back in 1970 about, gave Congo 72 road graders, bright yellow road graders, and the ones from Canada, this one obviously is not from Canada, but ones from Canada had a big maple leaf stenciled on the yellow door of the road grader. And the Canadian Embassy sent us a letter, I think in 1973, something like that, to say that Congo had received all 72 of these road graders, but they could only account for 10 of them. What had happened to all the other road graders? And the problem is, of course, that out in the rural areas where these machines were most needed, something might break in the road grader. Just some bolt or other might fracture, and the machine would be pushed off to the side of the road and left while somebody decided how it was going to be repaired. Well, who knows which bolt it is that's broken? Who knows where they can get one of these bolts as a replacement? Who knows who's going to fit the bolt, even if they can find it? And so the machine is pushed off beside the road, has vines and growing all over it and trees growing through it. And in no time, it's hidden by the forest, and everybody has forgotten about this road grader. Now, what does Congo do? Well, Congo asks for 70 road graders from West Germany, and a very, very poor management of the resources of the country. So I want to show you this video now. Mobutu, a king of Zaire, and it's just a part of the full video, which you can find on YouTube, but just 20 minutes of it. But it's entitled An African Tragedy. Let's see if I can start this video up.
Moi, Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbwendu Wazabanga, élu président du mouvement populaire de la Révolution et de droit président de la République, je jure d'observer la Constitution et les lois de la République du Zaïre.
With colonization well underway, Mobutu is born in the Belgian Congo in the heart of the luxuriant equatorial forest. It is a country of excesses, with fabulous riches both above and below ground. Mobutu grows up in a country of legends, that of the Belgian king, Leopold II, the conquering king, the colonizing king, who, half a century earlier, had appropriated a territory 80 times larger than his own kingdom, all for himself.
Je dois être franc avec vous, ma jeunesse était plus ou moins orageuse parce que je n'étais pas facile non plus. D'abord, mes origines, des origines modestes, né d'un père qui était cuisinier, de missionnaires catholiques dans l'Équateur.
Forcefully inducted into the colonial army because of his undisciplined behavior studying under the missionaries, for 7 years Mobutu learns submission and experiences humiliation.
J'ai vu arriver donc dans mon bureau le jeune caporal secrétaire Mobutu. Donc c'était un jeune homme mince à l'époque, décontracté et qui avait l'air très sympathique. Nous l'avions surtout pris pour un peu pour collaborer à notre journal de la force publique, parce qu'il nous fallait quelqu'un qui parle très bien le lingala. D'ailleurs, il a fait ça très bien. Et alors, on lui a même autorisé, on l'a autorisé pour son boulot à fréquenter un peu les milieux journalistiques de Kinshasa, donc de Léopoldville à l'époque. C'est comme ça qu'il a fait la connaissance de beaucoup de personnalités locales.
Leaving the army, I believe after 7 years in service, he became a journalist in a normal public newspaper, if you will, but he also worked nights writing articles for an underground newspaper, which was favored independence.
At 28, Mobutu has the rare privilege of being able to take a course as journalist during the World Exhibition at Brussels.
Les Congolais en particulier étaient très contents ces jours-là et tous sont bien habillés. Beaucoup se firent accompagner de leurs femmes. Un couple congolais va faire un tour de l'exposition en pouce et pouce. Les voilà en route. Ils sont souriants et très curieux des belles choses qu'ils voient autour d'eux.
Représentant des autochtones en quelque sorte dans la rédaction de l'Avenir. Et quelle est la réaction des autochtones vis-à-vis de vos articles ou vis-à-vis du journal?
La réaction, n'est-ce pas, est nuancée parce que quand aujourd'hui, par exemple, je prends position sur un problème bien déterminé, tous mes lecteurs sont d'accord avec moi. Je vais vous citer un cas.
Oui.
Il y a 3 mois, j'ai pris position sur un problème, n'est-ce pas, de salaire, sur le problème des salaires. Tous mes lecteurs étaient avec moi parce que j'ai trouvé que les salaires des ouvriers congolais étaient bas. Le lendemain, quand j'ai dit à mes lecteurs qu'il fallait aller doucement dans les revendications,
oui,
n'est-ce pas?
Oui,
il faut être prudent et ils ont trouvé, n'est-ce pas, que j'étais traître, n'est-ce pas, je trahissais la cause, n'est-ce pas, des Congolais.
Le métier journaliste n'est pas tout pour.
On voit par là, n'est-ce pas, que le public vogue, enfin.
Back in the Congo, Mobutu is one of the few journalists to witness the anti-colonial rioting and demonstrations by the Congolese. Not long after these events, Patrice Lumumba, the nationalist leader, whose disciples already include Mobutu, is arrested by the colonial authorities. A year later, released from prison, Patrice Lumumba, the hero of the Congolese people, arrives in Brussels to negotiate the independence of his country. Mobutu is at the forefront of those who welcome him.
Du journaliste que j'étais, cette rencontre avec Lumumba m'a conduit à m'occuper plus de la politique que de tout le reste. Lorsque Lumumba est venu pour discuter avec les autorités belges de l'indépendance nationale, me trouvant sur place, il a fait de moi son secrétaire particulier.
Behind the scenes in the royal palace at the time of the negotiations for independence, Mobutu finally discovers this young Belgian monarch, King Baudouin, who is the same age as him and whose destiny is already written in history. But in the shadow of Patrice Lumumba, Mobutu says little and listens a lot.
Au de la table ronde, beaucoup d'étudiants ont été appelés pour assister les leaders africains. Et Lumumba était l'un des plus entourés. Mais il y avait tout un tas de personnes aussi plus ou moins discrètes, dont Mobutu. Et partout, il était là à côté. Mais nous, on ne le considérait pas à l'époque comme quelqu'un de dangereux ou quelqu'un de n'importe quoi. Non. On trouvait que c'était un petit qui essaye d'exister en profitant de l'ombre d'un grand.
The one name that kept coming up was this young man by the name of Mobutu. It was amazing now as I look back how many people spotted him as a potential leader.
Peuple congolais, mon pays et moi-même, nous reconnaissons avec joie et émotion que le Congo accède ce 30 juin 1960 en plein accord avec la Belgique à l'indépendance et à la souveraineté internationale.
The First Republic of the independent Congo is led by President Joseph Kasavubu and Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, who, when he forms his first government, names Joseph Désiré Mobutu as Secretary of State.
En fait, l'armée se trouvait sans aucun commandement. Et dans le bureau de Lumumba, il y avait son secrétaire, qui était l'homme Mobutu. C'était le seul homme qui avait une petite texture militaire. Et c'est comme ça, dans le bureau, en cherchant, il a vu, toi, il dit, toi, hein, toi, tu prendras le commandement de l'armée. C'est comme ça
qu'il a été désigné à ma place, de chef d'état-major de la force publique. Donc, il s'appelait ANC à partir de ce jour-là. Et alors, j'ai commencé mon rôle d'assistant technique. C'est-à-dire que je suis resté dans mon bureau, lui s'était installé dans le bureau du commandant en chef, et nous avons essayé, tant bien que mal, de remettre de l'ordre dans les affaires.
Après qu'il ait été votre subordonné, vous êtes devenu...
Je suis devenu son adjoint, son conseiller technique, théoriquement.
He had to make all decisions, and I think it was just too much for him. He was under constant pressure. He got in the habit of keeping a bottle of whiskey on his desk, and he would take a shot, just pick up the bottle and drink from it. And it was clear to me that he was losing his mind, that if he failed at this time, that the Congo would fall into the hands of the Soviets. And I did not, certainly my country didn't want it. I didn't want it. It was the height of the Cold War. And he kept ignoring this recommendation, and as I'd talk with him, he'd pick up his bottle and drink from it, and I finally just snatched it away and smashed it across his desk. In rather strong terms, said, you'll either stop drinking or you will fail.
À peine était-il nommé colonel que des gens se sont présentés pour le soudoyer. Ne fût-ce que sa voiture, je ne citerai pas de nom, mais les solliciteurs étaient nombreux et en général, ils venaient les mains chargées de présents. On l'a très vite éduqué à la corruption, sinon active, du moins passive. Il a, dès le début, au lieu d'user d'autorité militaire, disons, il a plutôt toujours essayé d'arranger les choses par l'argent. L'enveloppe, enfin. Hein. Il travaillait plus par l'argent que par l'autorité.
Only a few days after independence, Mobutu has to face a mutiny from within the army. Born into disorder, confusion and hate, the young Congolese state sinks into bloody anarchy. Soon, those regions richest in minerals, amongst them the province of Katanga, proclaim secession. This is fomented by the powerful Union Minière, which is mining copper, cobalt and uranium. It's backed by Belgium and by the white colonists. In these times of Cold War, the country explodes and sinks into violence, necessitating the intervention of the United Nations. At first, Prime Minister Lumumba and Colonel Mobutu tried to bring about calm and so preserve the unity of the country. Very quickly, Lumumba demonstrates to the world his spirit of independence. He accuses the old colonial powers of being behind the unrest. Mobutu, however, reveals to the world his allegiance to the Western powers. He accuses Lumumba of being a communist sympathizer.
It must have been somewhere between the 12th and the 15th of August that the United States adopted a position that it would be preferable for a new government to come to power, i.e. that Lumumba should go. Decision was made at a very high level. I was told at the time it came from the President of the United States, but I have no way of proving or disproving that statement, that Lumumba should be physically removed. This was never sent to me on paper. I received an instruction that a person who would identify himself as Joe from Paris would arrive, I would recognize him, that he was a CIA officer, that I would recognize a senior CIA officer, and when I met him, I was to take my instructions from him. And one day, I went out of the embassy going somewhere, and standing across the street was a man that I recognized. And he told me that it had been decided that Lumumba had to go, and if he could not go politically, that he had to be physically removed.
L'armée prend le pouvoir au Congo ex-belge.
Allô, allô, chers compatriotes, ici c'est le colonel Mobutu Joseph, chef d'état-major de l'armée nationale congolaise, qui vous parle de Léopoldville. L'armée nationale congolaise a décidé de neutraliser le chef de l'État jusqu'à la date du 31 décembre 1960. Comme chacun pourra dès demain se rendre compte, il ne s'agit pas d'un coup d'État militaire, mais plutôt d'une simple révolution pacifique. L'armée va aider le pays à résoudre tous ces différents problèmes qui deviennent de plus en plus aigus. Vive le Congo, vive l'armée nationale congolaise.
Colonel Mobutu shows his hand in public. His soldiers surround the Prime Minister's residence. Patrice Lumumba is now under house arrest.
Quel jeu joue monsieur le colonel Mobutu? Ça a été votre homme de confiance quand même, Mobutu, non?
Oui, ça a été un homme de confiance. Mobutu, il était mon secrétaire attaché au bureau de Bruxelles. Au moment de la formation du gouvernement, je l'ai fait venir ici. Je lui ai confié un poste important dans le gouvernement, secrétaire d'État à la présidence. Personnellement, je ne comprends pas son acte. Il a sa conscience.
Croyez-vous à une réconciliation prochaine?
Moi, je suis franchement pour la réconciliation. Au besoin, l'armée l'imposera.
Il dit que je suis un perdant, mais au contraire, toute la campagne faite contre moi est interprétée par le peuple congolais comme une campagne contre le renversement du gouvernement, une campagne contre l'indépendance que nous venons de conquérir.
Dès qu'il avait l'occasion, il humiliait le plus possible. C'était une façon de se venger de sa jeunesse à lui.
Lumumba, c'était son père spirituel.
Oui.
C'est celui qui l'a fait devenir chef d'état-major.
Donc c'était les grands, alors que lui n'était rien. Et alors à ce moment-là, dès qu'il a pu l'avoir, il a tout fait pour l'humilier, le réduire à zéro.
Il y avait un désaccord avec Lumumba. Certains procédés que je n'approuvais pas. Par exemple, il pouvait, comme ça, sans me prévenir, aller dans un camp militaire et procéder à des nominations. Un tel caporal devenait lieutenant, tel sergent passait capitaine, commandant, et il signait devant les troupes à mon insu. Et puis ça ne pouvait pas me faciliter la tâche. Et comme je suis de nature qui aime l'ordre, j'ai remis de l'ordre. C'était ma façon de réagir. Pas contre la personne de Lumumba, mais parce que je n'aime pas le désordre.
Et Lumumba, à ce moment, a disparu.
Oui, c'est cela.
Arrested by Mobutu after a failed escape attempt, Lumumba is jailed with the blessing of the Belgian and American ambassadors.
Vous avez dit un jour, au fond, que l'armée ne ferait plus jamais de politique, mais qu'elle ne se sentait pas obligée à obéir à n'importe quel gouvernement. Est-ce que ce n'est pas un paradoxe? C'est un paradoxe, mais est-ce que ce n'est pas une contradiction?
Ça peut être un paradoxe et une contradiction, mais il faut vivre la situation de la République pour bien comprendre ce que je voulais dire par là.
Est-ce que la situation de septembre 60, la neutralisation des leaders politiques par l'armée, pourrait se reproduire?
Je ne crois pas. Ça, c'est du passé.
The revolution knows no respite. With the colonial statues demolished and thrown into history's backyard, Mobutu establishes Mobutuism with the ideology of a one-party system.
Le moboutisme, doctrine du MPR, c'est la pensée, les enseignements et l'action du guide de Mobutu Sese Seko.
Mobutu Sese Seko, de son parti, le père, de son président fondateur. Mobutu Sese Seko.
Mais c'est moi qui ai créé le terme moboutisme. En fait, c'est quand il est revenu de Pékin et quand il est revenu de Pyongyang, donc de la Chine populaire et de la Corée du Nord. Là, le président a été vraiment frappé par le culte de la personnalité, par le pouvoir de Mao, par le pouvoir de Kim Il-sung. Tout le monde était derrière. Il a voulu faire la même chose ici.
La faction du MPR qui les soutenait a essayé d'en faire les dieux sur terre pour consolider les pouvoirs, de façon que ces pouvoirs puissent rester, qu'il n'y ait plus aucune force qui puisse les contester. Et alors, c'était le culte de la personnalité. Tout le monde devait faire référence à sa pensée, le maoïsme, quoi. Ils sont allés en Chine, ils ont importé les costumes Mao, mais comme ils n'étaient pas tout à fait authentiques, ils ont inventé les costumes, l'abacos, et tout un tas de choses qu'ils ont fait, mais visant uniquement à consolider les pouvoirs qu'ils détenaient.
Nous chanterons et danserons. Pour honorer notre guide et lui exprimer notre amour. Nous chanterons et danserons. Pour honorer notre guide et lui exprimer notre amour. L'authenticité est notre philosophie politique. Nous voulons être nous-mêmes et non ce que les autres voudraient que nous soyons. La République du Zaïre.
La concentration des pouvoirs, les louanges, la gloire, la popularité, tous les médias mis au service d'un seul homme. Moi, je l'ai fait, mais je ne pensais pas que c'était mauvais à l'époque. Mais là, le Congo était le plus grand village. Partout où il passait, il voulait qu'on chante, qu'on danse en son honneur. C'est ce que j'ai fait faire, puisque j'étais responsable de la mobilisation, propagande et animation politique du parti-État de l'époque. Il aimait ça, il adorait ça. J'ai pris la photo de Mobutu, je l'ai mise dans les nuages. Et avant le journal télévisé, on voyait Mobutu surgir des images, comme un dieu, effectivement. Parce que les enfants, les petits, croyaient qu'il était effectivement Dieu, puisqu'il sortait des images. À chaque journal télévisé. Quand je l'ai fait, il était tellement content. Il m'appelait, il dit, mais mon cher, c'est ce que tu dois faire. C'est bien comme ça, continue comme ça. Mais moi, je lui disais, je le fais pour le développement du pays. Oui, continue.
Le mot bouddhisme, lorsqu'on en parle, c'est quoi exactement? Ça se résume en ceci: les enseignements, la pensée et l'action du président fondateur du MPR.
After that marvelous show of devotion to Mobutu, just to talk about some of the events towards the end of his life, and particularly his natal village, Badaliti, right on the edge of northwest Congo, on the border with Central African Republic. And it's there that Mobutu wanted to place the capital, in his birth village. He built there a very western city. Here's the entrance to the airport, where he could fly up, and he spent a lot of his time of his last years there at Bedoliti, the control tower, modern communications with satellite, whatever else, a residence for his visitors, which was never completed. And this is what it looks like now, and the crane is still outside, finishing off this multi-story residence in the middle of nowhere. Here's his house, a picture taken when it was in reasonably good shape, and some of the ornamental gardens outside, and his personal bodyguard, one of his personal bodyguards, standing close by. There's the airstrip. I think something like 3 kilometers long enough for the Concorde supersonic airliner to land there. And Mobutu chartered the airplane several times to take him to various parts of the world and take his whole entourage, family and friends, to Disneyland in the United States several times. This is what the inside of the house looks like now. It's been ransacked completely. Everything portable has been stolen. The roof is collapsing, some indication of some of the chandeliers. The remains of the chandeliers that are there, a young Congolese from the village of Badaliti who's there, wandering around, seeing if there's anything he can help himself to. And there it is, being overrun by the jungle, the house and the gardens, in complete disrepair, and nobody's particularly interested in it these days. So Mobutu's downfall really started in 1996, in power from 1965 until 1996, and his government issued an order for Rwandans, the Rwandan Tutsis, to leave Zaire on penalty of death. And this upset the Rwandans very much. These Tutsis, yes, they were from a Rwandan tribe, but the borders had been placed in 1885 without any reference at all to tribal position and loyalties, and the Tutsi tribe were cut in half by these geographical boundaries at a conference where there wasn't a single African, and the Europeans were carving up Africa. So many of these Tutsis may have been there for well over 100 years, and yet now all of a sudden they're being asked to leave Zaire, and this upset Rwandan very much, and the Minister of Defense at the time, Paul Kagame, who is now the president of Rwanda, and they, together with Yoweri Museveni, who had designs on parts of Congo up in the north, they launched an offensive to overthrow Mobutu. They joined forces with locals opposed to Mobutu, and particularly Laurent Désiré Kabila, who had been in opposition and lived in Tanzania, spoke English, but he came back and got the help of Museveni and Kagame to oppose Mobutu, and this mushroomed into the First Congo War. We'll talk about the wars in a separate seminar a little bit later. But the war ended with Laurent Kabila. You see him there on the right. When Laurent Kabila arrived in Kinshasa and there was actually no opposition, he marched with his troops and with Rwandan and Ugandan troops right across the country to enter Kinshasa, and people at that time welcomed him, and Mobutu lost the sympathy of the people, and Nelson Mandela was called in to arrange peace between the two of them and to arrange the future of the country. So Laurent Kabila became the president in 1997, and this peace brokered by Nelson Mandela, and Mobutu was exiled to Morocco, where he died the same year of cancer of the prostate. He had been treated in Switzerland several times for cancer of the prostate. Last time, they tell us that he left the Grand Hotel in Lausanne without paying his hotel bill. He was now quite a poor man by previous standards, when he had been so rich before. Now he just had a couple of $1 million left, just as he had stolen from the state, and accounts had been bad so that nobody particularly noticed. People were stealing from him, and he didn't notice either. And though he might have been very wealthy at one stage, when he died, he was comparatively poor. Kabila himself was in a delicate position because he was being supported by powers much greater than himself. And when he ordered the departure of all foreign troops from the country, that's to say departure of Ugandans and Rwandans that had been supporting him, that got him into trouble and led to the Second Congo War. And in the Second Congo War, his former Rwandan and Ugandan allies began sponsoring several different rebel groups to overthrow him. And during the war, he was assassinated. 2001, one of his bodyguards. And it took a little while, and nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. But 10 days later, a group in Kinshasa decided that his 29-year-old son, Joseph, would become the new president of Congo. So Joseph, educated in England and in Tanzania, he was there because his father had opposed Mobutu and the whole family had moved to Tanzania. So when he became president, he couldn't speak the official language of Congo. which was French. I used to joke just a little bit, please forgive me, but I said to the folk in Congo, well, we used to have a prime minister in Canada that couldn't speak either of the official languages, that's to say English or French, and that was Jean Chrétien. His French was French of the rural areas. He sometimes was difficult to understand in French, and his English wasn't so good either, but he was a very effective prime minister of Canada. But Kabila, that was a big problem, not to be able to speak the language of Congo, but he learnt quickly. He would hold rallies with a small musical band, musicians, trumpets, trombones, and he would read one sentence in French, and then the band would play for a minute before he looked at his notes and read the second line of his speech in French. I was there at a rally in Bunia when he first arrived in the country, and this is exactly how things went. There was the band, there was Mobutu, a big parade, big celebrations, and Kabila giving this speech in French, rather hesitant French, but learning fast how to rule the country. He reversed a lot of the changes that Mobutu had made. He brought back suits and ties, and you saw him just in that last picture with a regular European, North American suit and a regular tie. He brought back Christian names. He was known as Joseph Kabila. He brought back democracy. He called the Congo the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we had elections, or at any rate, elections that could be credible to some extent. And he respected the Constitution. He resigned. The Constitution said he could only have 2 terms in office, and he resigned after a second term. Just immediately at the moment, there's a plan to revise the Constitution and allow the president to stay for more than 2 terms. And there might be some pressure from above to do that, but I think the American system, 2 terms only, is something that I would like the Congo to maintain. Maybe he is still influencing present politics because he became very wealthy while he was president, for the 10 years or so that he was president. And it may be that the present president is very much his puppet. He can organize things by using his finance. And you will have gathered that's exactly how Mobutu moved things around as well. Because of his immense wealth, he could act as he wanted to. And Kabila certainly is one of the richest men in the world, and although he's not in power, he can influence the present President Tshisekedi. So in 2006, we had viable elections for the first time. Here's an election poster for Kabila saying how he's going to modernize everything. And a suggestion that he wants 100% of the population to vote for him. He's number 3 on the ballot paper, just to tell you where to vote. And elections were well organized by the United Nations, printing and sending out voting forms throughout the whole whole country. Everybody had to have an election card, and that was printed specially for you, and that enabled you to vote. Lots of demonstrations in favor of Mobutu, in favor of Kabila there in Kinshasa. And then the voting, here we are in Owicha, and this was the first time for many people to vote. There had been some votes for Mobutu. One voting occasion, there were red and green tickets that you could pick up at the voting station and place in the electoral box. And green if you wanted Mobutu to stay on, and red if you wanted him to leave office, with a big soldier standing guard over these electoral pieces. And boy, if you picked up a red card, you would be in trouble. But here, this was much freer, and a well-printed electoral paper, and you could tick off the person you wanted to be president. Lots and lots of questions, and fortunately cell phones had arrived just at this time. And the electoral officers, and here's one of our old students, Kiusa, acting as an electoral officer, he could phone up Kinshasa to ask what he should do if there were any particular questions. There's the electoral office, and some of the electoral officers who are just local people who'd been recruited, and a policeman there as well. And the electoral office was a classroom in one of the schools. Big crowds there, all wanting to vote for the first time in their lives, for many of them, and with these special electoral cards and electoral papers. I met President Kabila shortly after this. I was introduced to Kabila by Dr. Lucy, who had been nominated as a senator because of his support of Kabila's father. And I had a very pleasant chat in English with Kabila, quite different from Mobutu. Mobutu was big and hearty and giving you the impression that he was very confident. Kabila, a short man, Kabila somewhat timid, giving you the impression that he wasn't completely comfortable in office at that time. We talked particularly about the destruction of Nyankundi that had taken place, the destruction of the hospital. We'll talk about that just a little bit later. And Kabila gave us his complete support. Of course, he said our support will be largely moral and not financial, but we want to encourage you to rebuild Nyankundi and restore it to its former size and quality. So it was very interesting for me to meet Kabila and to compare it with my impressions of Mobutu. After 2018, Kabila had to resign. He'd had his full terms in office, and we had a further election along very similar lines, and Felix Tshisekedi was elected as president. He was the son of another opponent of Mobutu, who had lived in Belgium, been educated in Belgium, educated in French. He brought his whole family back to Congo once Mobutu had left. But the result of the election didn't agree with the Catholic Church's exit polls. They asked everybody leaving the polling booth who they'd voted for. And there were three candidates who seemed to be getting most of the votes. One was Kabila's designated successor, but he only got 5% of the votes according to the Catholic Church. Tshisekedi got something like 20–25%, but there was another candidate who, according to the Catholic Church, got even more votes, and that was Fayulu, who was the head of Exxon in Congo. A gentleman with an MBA from the United States, Masters of Business Administration, was well administering this big oil company, Exxon, and he was not told that he had been elected. It was up to the Electoral Commission to decide who was properly elected, and all of the Electoral Commission had been nominated by Joseph Kabila, and so we're a little suspicious of the result. But he was elected back then in 2018, and he was re-elected in 2023, and he is the present president. The Constitution gives place for a prime minister, ministers, deputy ministers, and the number of these ministers vary a lot from one to the next, but the present government is under the leadership of a lady, Judith Suminwa. She's only been appointed this year. She's a banker with a master's degree in applied economics from the university in Brussels. She assumed office at the behest of Parliament on the 21st of February 2024. Her cabinet was announced on the 29th of May 2024. But this is a very weak government. And it's very weak because of the inheritance from Mobutu of many, many, many different political parties. There's Judith, and she has a real tightrope to walk upon to try and keep the balance between all of these different political parties. There was during the last election at the end of 2023, there was some questioning of the election. 9 opposition candidates rejected the election, but only 9. And one of the other opposition candidates, Moise Katumbi, who had been governor of one of the provinces, he was momentarily placed under house arrest, but this was he was quickly released. So President Tshisekedi only won 69 seats in the 500-member National Assembly, with 44 different political parties vying for their voice to be heard. These parties are generally geographical, different parts of the country, and tribal. The largest tribes having the largest political parties. And as I mentioned already, this is part of the inheritance of Mobutu, who paid people to start political parties in order to divide any opposition. But that makes the present Parliament of Congo a very weak body. And I'll just show you this illustration of the 500-seat Parliament in Congo at the moment. And these different colors represent different parties. Tshisekedi's party is in red there on one side with 69 seats, but you can see all of the other parties with various numbers of seats, some of them are very, very small parties. And this is a very weak government, and this is why there is so much chaos in the country really at the moment, because the government just has no powers to maintain peace and order as they should. Well, rather a depressing end to this seminar, but we'll explore the government and the country again from a different point of view in our next seminar. Thank you all very, very much.